It. All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Moms Love Coaching, our Facebook Live every 2 weeks on Wednesday at 7 p.m. This is our third live for you. And today, what we're going to do is talk with Angie about her struggles as a mom. And she's going to tell us all about all the things that she went through, as she was figuring out how to be a mom and, what she's learned along the way and mistakes she's made and things that she's learned and all of those things. So the first question, I want to get right into it because we only have a half an hour.
Hi, everybody.
Say hi, Angie. So the first question,
30 minutes.
Yeah. The first question that I want to ask is, talk about when you became a mom for the first time and your struggles with that and, how it affected you as a person and all of that. Because that's a huge change from not being a mom to being a mom.
Yeah. And even though I, as a kid, I spent a lot of time around babies and little kids. And, I was always the one that if there were my cousins, I remember they were quite a bit younger than me and playing with them and always was very comfortable with kids. I became a mom. My husband and I were stationed in the Philippines. He was in the Air Force. And our son Jacob was born in the Philippines. And so it was a traumatic birth experience. And I, at one point I'm just sitting on the table, they're doing the epidural, and my husband had food poisoning. Of course, I have no family there because we're in the Philippines. They aren't going to drive.
Right.
Drive to the Philippines,
but that would be difficult.
To the Philippines. And so, and they kept hitting my spine with the epidural needle. And I was like, it was terrible. And so then, they were getting ready to do I was having an emergency C-section because he had decelerations in his heartbeat. And then I was not completely numb. So as they went to, it was traumatic. I was like, I feel that. And next thing I know, they're like, bye. And they put me to sleep. And my son was born. Wow. He had some meconium. And so they were keeping a close watch on him. He was with me in the bedroom. In the room, in his little bassinet. So it was fine. And, I had, at that point, we stayed and then they kept us in the hospital for 5 days. I just wanted to get home, get my baby home and figure it out. Because that's kind of, how I roll. And so he was, it just went kind of, I just did what I had to do. It didn't bother me. I think I was a very natural, it came very natural to me. And then we flew home when Jacob was 4 months old. And at that point, he was nursing and taking a bottle. And then when we traveled home, I had to be sure that I was continuing to give him a bottle. I think I'm mixing up my timeline anyway. We were home later when he was older, and he was 11 months old and he was still nursing. And we had not given him a bottle. And I had to leave the wedding that I was at to go nurse him because he was inconsolable. So nursing went really well. And so it was with him. It wasn't until, he was older, when he was school age, when I really started to feel a lot of pressure to do things right, to have him, and he was a high energy kid. And I graduated, I got my degree when he was when I was pregnant with him. I got my associate's degree. So then I had gone on and finished my bachelor's degree to become a teacher, and graduated when he was 4. And so we had moved back here to Vermont, where we live now, near my parents and my husband's family as well. And so it, we had them to help us. And it, trying to start my career as an educator, and my husband's trying to figure out who he is and what he's doing after he gets out of the Air Force, and it floundered a little bit. And then we very quickly slipped into very traditional roles. And I don't know if it was, I think it was probably a combination. My need to control things, and he let me do that. So I'd say probably my biggest struggle raising a young kiddo was division of labor and finding time to take care of myself and go for walks and stuff. And I was on a 10-year plan with him. It took me 10 years to lose that baby weight. I think he was 10 years old, and I'd lost the baby weight. And during that time, Brett and I didn't really intend to have an only child at that point, but that was just how things were going. And so we thought he was going to be an only for a long time, for 7 years. And then I got pregnant. It was like, what is happening? Unfortunately, that pregnancy didn't last very long. It was a couple weeks that I was pregnant, and then I had a miscarriage, and it was devastating. It was devastating because it was like, oh my goodness, we didn't think we could get pregnant again. And we went, and we were okay with just having Jacob. But lo and behold, I did get pregnant in my next cycle, and then our daughter was born. Our daughter Sydney was born. I was 37. So at this point, what do they call it? A ancient mother? It's not an ancient pregnancy.
A geriatric pregnancy or something. Yeah.
Pregnancy.
Yeah.
So
I had one of those too.
Yeah. So I'm 37 when Sydney's born, and then a year and a half later was pregnant again an early miscarriage. I think it was just my body getting my hormones right. And a few months later was pregnant with our youngest daughter. So we have 3 kids together. And it is, the girls raising a single versus raising, 2 together is very different. And I think just the timing of the whole thing was good for me in terms of where I was at with my career when my girls were born, because I was able to go back to work part-time. My mother was able to take care of Sydney, my oldest daughter. And then by the time Whitney came along, my mom had started to get, she was in her late 70s, and she's like, yeah, I don't think I can handle 2 toddlers, or a toddler and a baby. So,
neither can I.
And for the most part, we had a few bumps in the road, but for the most part, the daycare went, we were lucky in that way. So then they became, then they were going to school. And because I worked in our local school, we moved to the town that I taught in when Jacob began 8th grade. So the school here is a K-8 school. And so he did 8th grade here, and then he went back to the town that we came from for high school. So he was very happy with that. But then the girls always went to school here in our town. So from kindergarten to 8th grade. And then, and there was, the juggling the full-time job, not overworking, and then having, I think trying to figure out where the balance of labor is. Like, what does he do? What do I do? And because my job I was a teacher, summers off, all the school vacations, and I'm very good at doing multiple things and managing the household and all those things. Like, I think that I forgot that Angie needed to have some nurturing and some time and not feel guilty about it, like mom
Mm-hmm.
guilt.
Yeah.
Like I should have just had it tattooed on my forehead. If I'm not doing it, then it's not getting done right. And I think, unfortunately, hindsight's 2020, right? I think I also, um, my husband felt that way, like he couldn't do anything right. So
Mm,
if you're not doing anything right, then why are you going to do it? You quickly
right.
back off. Um, and the girls, um, the challenges with the girls were very different than the challenges with Jacob. Jacob was a very strong-willed child, and stubborn. Yeah, really, really stubborn, and he didn't like school. And yeah, boys, schools and boys can sometimes be very challenging. School for boys can be very challenging, especially if they're active.
Mm,
And it wasn't about, for him, it wasn't about his ability. He could learn and understand anything he wanted to learn. It didn't, he didn't want to do what they asked him to do. So school was, um, and we got him through it. And then as a young adult, thinking about the parallels between him and my daughters now, who are young adults, and the struggles with, the lifestyle, the choices they make. In
mm-hmm.
Vermont, marijuana is legal. It's like, you know, my husband and I do not subscribe to that thinking, or have, and the kids just choose different things, right? And so it's
Yep.
trying to find that balance between how much do you let them experiment and be their own person and learn from their own mistakes, and then how much are you saying, I don't, this is not my choice, this is not my lifestyle, and this is my house, my rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's never really worked for us. I don't know. My husband just
I
kind
don't
of
think
push
it's
over
really worked for anybody in the long run.
in the long run. Well, Jacob, we were much more boom, this is how it's going to
Yeah.
be. And, the girls were little when he was going through all that. And it's like we drew the line in the sand, and then he ended up moving out.
Mm-hmm.
And it, he is 14 years older than my youngest one. And so it was, 14 years ago when he was, in his late teens. It was a different kind of situation than it is now. And so the girls, trying to find the balance between, they don't really know what they want to do with their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to figure that out, working right now, and just, uh, you know, we live in a rural area, so trying to have friends and relationships and things like that, find things to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think, uh, I mean, Jacob was not easy for me. I think we clashed because we're probably more alike than the girls and I are.
Mm-hmm.
And we had pretty high expectations for him, uh, and now he's a parent, so watching him parent, I can see um, how some of that of the way we parented is reflected, the good and the bad, right,
Mm-hmm.
in how he parents. So, um, you- I was when I think back to the kids' childhood, there's a few things. It's like when I got overwhelmed. First of all, I yelled way too much, and I didn't realize. I think it was you, Carrie, that said, my anxiety when I was feeling anxious, I would get so mad. And
Mm,
I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it was. It's like we always have this to this day. We still have
yeah.
this thing about getting into the car to go someplace. We could know for days and days, weeks and weeks, that on this day we need to be in the car by 9 a.m. so we can be at the place by 9:30.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, it's just like I can feel the stress to try to get out the door. And
Yep.
so can imagine if getting out the door was a challenge for you, and then I'm getting the teenager out the door and the toddler and the preschooler out the door. mornings could be quite a nightmare, especially when the teenager didn't want to get out of bed, which, that's when you're like, get out of bed, and you turn into a crazy monster mom.
Yeah.
And so there was,
Yeah.
fair amount. I mean, I think I blamed and disparaged my husband. You have it so easy. I'm the one stuck with all of this because I'm the one that works in school. I have the same schedule as kids, so it falls on me. And then my husband's pastime is he is a hunter, and that certain times of year they hunt before dusk after work, and would be gone in the evenings in October, and that was soccer season. So who was doing soccer season? But in some ways we balanced it out because Jacob was doing high school athletics and the girls were babies then. Or I mean, I couldn't go to the basketball game where we were going to get home at 10 a.m.
Right.
10 p.m. rather, with the 5-year-old in the who had to go to school the next day. So I'd stay home with the girls, and in some ways that we went to a lot of his games before the girls had to be at school. So when he was in middle school, but his high school athletics, I don't think I saw as much. And in some ways that's kind of sad to me, but in other ways it was the way it had to be. And his dad went. So I think I started feeling that things were balancing out a little bit more as the girls got into high school. Although in high school I was still doing transportation. The few years that Sydney was driving so the girls went to school 30 miles away, not 30 miles, 30 minutes away. It took us 25 to 30 minutes to get to their school. And so when Sydney was still in school with Whitney, they could drive to school together, but COVID hit, they were home. Sydney graduated the year COVID hit. And then, of course, Whitney was not driving. She didn't get her license till she was 17. So her senior year. And then at that point I was still driving her in the morning. And so, I'm thinking, wow, that was just, a year and a half ago now, almost 2 now, right? 2 years she's been out of school? No, 1.
Yeah.
Graduated. Yeah. 1 year. So, and I think, oh my gosh, I got that hour back. Sorry, my grand doggy is down here. So,
that's okay.
Yeah.
All are welcome.
Yes. Four-legged friend. Bring it.
So that was a great summary of from the beginning until now. So I have a question about so there's a few transitions, right? So there's the transition from not being a mom to being a mom. Then there's the transition from being the mom of one to being the mom of a few, right? And now there's the transition of, you're not never a mom, but, with needing to be more involved. And now the kids are older. One of them is a parent. The other two are older. They don't need as much attention in the same way, right?
Right.
So
they always need attention.
They always need attention.
Lie,
they always need
the
attention.
big lie that they stop needing you. They need you. I remember talking with my brother-in-law about this. It's like their problems become more serious. And so it might not be the constant need of when they were teenagers or when they were, that slow period of school age kids. Oh yeah, I better make sure that we have groceries so I can feed them dinner. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they still require your energy, your thoughtfulness, your intention.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just want to say, figure it out.
Yeah. So
now my son, I'm sorry, Carrie, my son's 33 now. So he has pretty much figured it out. And he's really, I can see where we're at that point where the tide could shift and he could become the parent of, you know what I mean? If my husband or I became incapacitated in some way, I could totally
Yeah.
see how he could be. We could
Mm-hmm.
shift those roles really quickly.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
not so much with my younger two at this point.
At this point. So tell me about what is the hardest transition, or what was the hardest transition for you?
I think the hardest transition. So, in the school that I worked in, um, I came out of the classroom after I'd been there for 18 or 19 years, doesn't really matter. But Whitney was a fifth grader, no,
Mm-hmm.
a fourth grader. And then that I worked a year as an interventionist, and then I became the assistant principal in that school. Whitney had a class that had a lot of challenging behavior, a lot of kids with challenging behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a fifth grader that year that I started as assistant principal, and Sydney would have been seventh grade. So 2 years they were, and then Sydney graduated, and it. I was very used at that point as an assistant principal. You're working a lot of hours. You're answering emails. You're doing reports. You're doing all kinds of follow up, and so I didn't mind being at the school for their extracurricular activities. I would, a lot of nights we weren't getting home till
Mm-hmm.
6:30 because we would just stay right through, and I could work. So you can imagine when, um, when Whitney was going into at the end of her seventh grade year. At this point, so Sydney had had a year at a different, that was hard. She went to a school where I felt completely disconnected to the faculty, to the program. And there was a part of me that wanted to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, that's her thing. That's her. Um, I'm here to support her. I did meet some of her teachers, and, we'd do the open house nights and things like that. But um, it wasn't the same as, I'm right down the hallway. So when she gets sick and she ends up in the nurse's office, I'm right down the hallway. So I had a year of that, and then I had an opportunity to go to work in the central office. And I was like, but Whitney, it's her eighth grade year. And the eighth grade year in a K-8 school is very special.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is a rite of passage when they graduate, and knowing the so I wrestled with that, but I was like, if I don't take this opportunity this year, I could lose this opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew that the assistant principal job was so stressful
Mm-hmm.
and so hard. I was not going to be able to sustain it. I was also looking forward to having a new principal. We had hired a new principal that year who was coming in that would have been that subsequent year when Whitney was eighth grade. And I made the decision to leave the school. So that was really hard because I knew everything about her day to day, about her peers, how things were happening. And then I'm,
Mm-hmm.
just down the street in the same supervisory union, coming into the
Right.
schools from time to time, but not the same as being there every day.
Right.
And those few years, and then when she ended up, she went to, um, when she went to high school, the girls would take the bus for a while, and then Sydney got her driver's license sometime that spring of Whitney's freshman year, because by then Sydney was a junior. So it was, I think, I don't know, because COVID disrupted all that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was the following year. Whitney was, a couple years after. Whitney went to ninth grade, and then it was in 10th grade that COVID hit that spring, 10th
Yep.
grade. And so I kind of relished that time with having them home. I have some favorite memories of them playing out in the yard together. And, in some ways it was like they were 10 and 8 again.
Yeah.
Because they've always gotten along fairly well, but man, they can fight. Great fight. So, yeah, that I would say was probably the biggest transition. And then
Mm-hmm.
the one we're in now, where, where my husband and I are trying to find out, trying to figure out who we are as a married couple. And then who we are as parents of, we're grandparents now and parents of young adults who still need a lot of support in many ways, and trying to find that balance. Like, do we say something? Do we, so there are challenges, but it's in a different kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about coaching because I have always been interested in self-help. So, I grew up watching Oprah, right? Um, and I found the life coach school. That's how Carrie and I met. We were both in the life
Yep.
coach school, coaching in the same coaching cohort. And I started listening to that podcast, but I had been influenced by um, other self-help people, Martha Beck, Brene Brown, to name just Cheryl Richardson, just to name some of them. And
Yep.
uh, but when I started going through, the Life Coach School has a program called Self Coaching Scholars. It's now called Get Coached, and started doing that work and developing a morning routine that I could actually stick to. I was like, boy, how would I have parented differently when the kids were little? Because by the time I started doing this, it they were well into upper elementary school and then going off to high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we bought the elliptical. I bought my elliptical because I was like, I'm stuck home. It's not like I can go off for a walk up the road and leave the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen. And with my husband liked to hunt so much, I was home. There was a fair amount of time that I was home. I was the sole caregiver. So just for years I struggled with, I sometimes would have that morning routine on lock, and sometimes it wouldn't be so good. And the better I was at taking care of myself and exercising and having that half hour time in the morning was so good for me. And then
Yeah.
enter coaching, where I learned about the model and about how your thoughts create your feelings, which your feelings create, inform your actions. I was like, wow, there's a lot of ways that I was thinking about the kids and about myself, the way that I was thinking about who I should be as a mom, and that it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't good enough if I wasn't a certain way. The perfectionism, the
Right.
procrastination, all that stuff that
Yeah.
I learned to reframe and think about it in a different way. Now, do I still get hijacked by my brain when it comes to my kids? Yes. In fact, it happened this afternoon. Car repairs. Yeah. So,
Right. But you're able to catch it faster now
yes,
and pull yourself out of it a lot faster.
right.
So
And
like,
kind of laugh at it like, yep, that
yeah.
was a human response.
Yeah.
And
And not beat yourself up about it, right? So I'm going to go back a little bit because you talked a little bit about perfectionism when you first became a mom. You said something like, I was trying to do everything the right way,
yeah,
right? So talk a little bit about that, because I think that is like the crux of where all of, or maybe not all, but a lot of anxiety for moms, especially new moms, comes from, is because you don't necessarily know what you're doing because it's new. So you're just pulling from like what your parents did, what you see on TV, what people are telling you. And so like you're trying to do the right thing, and when you think it's not right, then you kind of flip out in your head. And then
I
so
can't
talk a little bit about
imagine.
that.
I can't
I'm going
imagine
to turn my
trying
light on.
to.
I'm disappearing. I just want to let
Yeah,
everybody know I'm in
yeah.
Massachusetts. It's getting a little darker. I'm in front of my window. I'm going to turn my light on. So there's probably going to be like a
Okay.
flash here for a second. But
So, as your camera
I
gets
know.
used to
I'm
going.
like disappearing. Sorry. I'm back.
um, yeah, I think about, parenting now with social media. While on the one hand, you can get a lot of support via social media, but the compare and despair, and been around, social media has been around for 10 some odd years, right? And I'm so glad that I didn't have to do my kids little during that time, because it's when they're little that everybody everybody has an opinion at various stages, but I feel like everybody wants to tell you how to parent your toddler, how to discipline your 3-year-old or your 7-year-old, and they would never get away with, you should try this, try that.
My kid would never do that. Blah,
exactly.
blah, blah. Right.
So now what was your question again? Because
just about the perfectionism or about that statement, you're trying to do the right thing. And so how did that, like looking back on it, how do you think that impacted your parenting and like your state of mind?
I remember hearing this some point along my journey as a parent, and I think at this point my girls were probably in upper elementary, and it said, it's not about doing the right thing, it's doing the thing right. And I was like, oh, like in other words, there's no real right thing. You just have to do it in a way that feels right to you. It's you do the thing in the way that you feel is right, not some imaginary judge, imaginary judge that's going to say, oh, well, you messed that up. And I mean, I think that by nature, I've always been kind of reflective, but I say reflective, but self-judgmental, right?
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing, just on one side, it's very serves you. And on the other side, it's not serving you. It is making you feel bad unnecessarily. And so being, self-reflective, and I was thinking about, well, could that have gone better? And I read all the books and read, I think blogs were the thing back then.
Yeah.
And did a fair amount of comparing and despairing, but I think I am just so grateful that I didn't have to be a new mom with social media around. It wouldn't have been good for me or my anxiety or my comparison shame, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to do that. You see other people. I mean, for me, it was looking at other people, looking at other moms being seemingly, I mean, you never know what's going on, but it seemed like they were so relaxed and they were just like, oh, go with the flow. And I just totally wasn't like that. And so I've had like a lot of shame about it. So it's like, just trying to do the right thing. It's just interesting that you said it that way, because I feel like that's what we all try to do. We try to do the right thing, right?
The thing. There's only one
right thing, right? Which doesn't exist, but we're all trying to do it. And when we don't do it, whatever that is, because since it doesn't exist, you're never going to do it. And then you feel bad about yourself because you didn't.
Then let the self-flagellation begin.
Yes.
Like I just imagine this whip right on my back.
Right. Exactly.
And it's a subtle. She's a subtle wench.
So, how do you think that impacted your relationship with your son?
My relationship with my son was troubled. I don't think it was as strong as it could be, because first of all, I allowed things that he said in the way, like I wanted him to be a different person than he was. I did not, I wanted him to be the student in school that I knew he could be, so that I could feel good. And, at the time I thought it was, for his future. So that, you tell yourself all kinds of things. But what I know now is that desire was really so that I could feel like I had done a good job.
Yeah.
And I mean, even now when I see other young women, my kids' age, my daughter's age, who are, doing things and taking life by the horns and doing, I don't know what the metaphor is, but, who are really adulting,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, what did I do wrong? Like there was something that, and my husband's the same way. We were both like, did we mess up? And we have these
Yeah.
conversations about, did we, uh, what was, you know, what was it with our parenting that didn't quite get our kids to where they should be? So they
Right.
should be. Like there
Right.
is a destination. There
Right.
isn't. It's,
Right.
and the accepting that, and doesn't mean that you don't want your kids to thrive. I think that's, that I always said, I just, in school, I wanted the teachers to see what great kids my kids were, even when they weren't straight A students, or, um, headed off to the Ivy League schools. But that they were good people, and that they were going to make a contribution to society, and that they knew how to make themselves happy. Like they knew enough about themselves to make themselves happy. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, watching my son grow from a young adult to a more mature man now, with his own family, and watching him develop his interests. He's, this fantastic gardener. He's into woodworking, and
Mm-hmm.
this was the kid that gamed a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and, I was like, oh my goodness, he's just going to be in my basement until he's 40 years old. So,
Right.
um, he has interests. He has things that he enjoys. And uh, that's that's really nice to see. The
Mm-hmm.
girls are trying to figure that out. Like right now, they're glad to have a car that runs. Thank you, mom and dad. A car that runs,
Yeah.
and um, you know, and just trying to just navigate life as a young adult here in this area. I think it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Probably hard everywhere,
Yeah.
but
Well,
um,
we're pretty much out of time, but I just
we
wanted to
are. Look at
say,
that.
I know we went by fast. So I just wanted to say, it's also interesting what you just said about watching your son mature into, the person that he is now. And I think that moms sometimes forget. I know I do. I did, and I do that your kids go through stages, and they're not going to be like that forever, because they're 7, and then they're 12, and then they're 16, right, and then they're 20, and then they're 25. Like all of those stages, it's almost like they are they become a different person like every few years,
Yeah, like
and you
the
just don't
snake,
know what's going to happen.
like the
Yeah.
way a snake sheds its skin. It's like
Yeah.
a total. Uh, it's a total
Yeah, it's a total,
new.
and you don't know what's going to happen, right? So it's like, I mean, I think about my daughter, or both of my daughters when they were little, and like they're like just not even that person anymore, and I think that is both comforting and upsetting, because
Yeah.
like whatever they're doing now, they're not going to probably be doing that in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years.
Mhm.
But at the same time, you kind of grieve for the little kid that you had, and how you knew them, and what you thought they were going to be, and then they completely change and do something that you didn't expect. You're like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this
Right.
now, so
Right.
it's
Like who'd have thought it? And I
like,
mean
yeah.
that goes toward, they can get into things that you don't want them to get into, and
Mm-hmm.
you know various things that have some real consequences, breaking the law, um, drug use. I mean, these things have very serious consequences, and it's the good and the bad. So you're watching them make choices, and what you make it mean about yourself. I mean,
Right.
that to me is the mom thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
we own so much of who our kids turn out to be, that it's why,
Yeah.
right? right? Like,
Well,
I
we're
did
conditioned for that, right? We're conditioned for you have to raise your kids the right way,
the
right?
right way.
Make them behave,
Uh-huh.
make them do what you say,
Yep.
and so they will do X, Y, and Z to be a good person in life. Like, that's not
Right.
a thing. But we've all been conditioned to think it's a thing.
Right.
It's not a
And that,
thing.
and it's so funny because you look from the outside, you look at other people and other people's children, and you think, oh, they're so perfect. And
Yeah.
where did I go wrong?
Right.
You know,
Right.
you just,
Exactly. Then
yeah,
you lift up the hood and you're like, oh, well, maybe
right,
not so much, you know? So
right.
it's
And
just, we put so much pressure on ourselves, like you said, right? So
yeah,
much pressure. And so if they fail or make a mistake, then you're a failure. That's how you feel,
right,
you know?
for sure.
And that is toxic. It's just toxic because it's just not how it is. They're as soon as you have that baby, even before, I mean, they develop their personalities way before they're born. But as soon as you have that baby, it's like, I wish that I knew then that they are their own person and I am just there to guide them and keep them alive until they can keep themselves alive. And whatever happens, happens. Like, I don't have that much control. If I had known that then, I would have had a very different life with my kids.
Yeah,
So
right. So that's why we do this work.
that's
I'm
why we do
thinking
this
about,
work.
um, I, I've heard this story a few different times, but more recently I was reminded of the story of Michelangelo when he looked at a piece of rock that he was going to make a sculpture, and it was like, what do I need to remove so it can come out? Like, that there's something, I'm
Mm,
butchering the reference, but something about, the rock is there, and I just need to remove the pieces that will allow whatever is going to be to be. And I
mm-hmm,
think about that in terms of parenting, because really what you're doing is you want your kids to find their way. And it's like, what can I help them reveal to themselves? It's not, like, I don't want to be literally thinking about removing obstacles from their path, because I do believe that kids have to struggle, and it is our job as parents to allow them that struggle and to help them figure out how to struggle in a way that is productive, like,
mm-hmm.
um, not not beating themselves up, not doing that sort of thing. And trying to figure out that with my older daughters now is, occasionally I have those conversations with the son. Sometimes I've had the wonderful opportunity to be in a car with him, just the two of us. That happens rarely. Um, Now, where we get into some deeper conversations, but having those conversations with the younger kids now, where they are trying to figure out how to be an adult and what they want their lives to be, and who they want to show up as. Is very much as, okay, how can I help them see who they are? How can I help them be the ones revealing themselves to them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
revealing what they need in their life. So, um, it's it is an interesting thing to be a mother,
Yes, to say the least.
to say the least.
All right,
So,
I think we're going to end it on that note. This went a little over, but that's okay. This is important stuff. And thank you everybody for watching. And we have our Facebook group to join. It's free. We have these lives every other Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we will also have all sorts of stuff in there. We're just getting going, and so we'd love for you to join us and be a part of this group. And yeah, so thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you soon. All right.
we'll see you soon. Good
All
night,
right.
everybody.
Bye bye.